Good morning, Redeemer. There, I got the right microphone. Good morning. It is nice to see you here, whether you are in person, you are online, outside with us. We are so glad that you are here. My name is Natalie. I'm a pastor here at Redeemer, and I have a few announcements for you this morning. First of all, hopefully you saw our greeting table as you walked in. There's name tags there. Also, you were supposed to get a little blue card that will be used during the sermon today, so hopefully you got one. If not, we can get one to you, but hopefully you grabbed one of those. You'll be using them later in the service during the sermon. There's also a tithe box back there. Bathrooms are outside. Today, it's such a beautiful day. We will be having our fellowship time out in the gazebo right after the service. So be sure to stay and have coffee and refreshments with us, and it'll be just right out here, out these doors. So be sure to stay. As you know, here at Redeemer, hopefully you see it around a lot. It is our goal, our mission for us to be seen, known, and loved. And that's twofold. We want to be seen, known, and loved by God. And we want to see, know, and love those around us. A vertical and a horizontal piece to being seen, known, and loved. And so this morning I have 3 announcements for you that go with those 3 things. So the first thing is our big day of service, and you've probably seen Michael Dunn up here talking about it. This is a great opportunity for us to see our neighborhood, see the people that we live with, and also to show some love also in the work that we'll do. But first, I'd like to invite Michael up. He's going to talk to us about Big Day of Service, and I'm going to help him because you know Michael, he's always got tricks up his sleeve here. Okay, I'm going to hold the mic for him, though.
Good morning, good morning. Okay, so Big Day of Service, May 6th, as it says up on there. I went over to the Heritage Oak Glen Mobile Home Park. That's where Johnny Keenan lives. We're going to be doing work over there, physical work. So there's 2 things. A bunch of you signed up for the registration part, and a bunch of you signed up for the physical labor stuff. So for the registration, all you need is your brain. Okay? Bring your brain, and you will be great. Now remember, you have to show up at 6:30 in the morning, right? Okay, 6:30. Now, on the physical labor part, we need a lot of stuff. We need, like, lopping shears. So everybody that signed up, I need you to bring tools, because I went over there the other day and saw there's 10 mobile homes that we have to do work around. Okay, and it's mostly weeding, pulling grass that's grown up through the rock, you know, that kind of stuff, trimming bushes, that kind of thing. We're not going to be mowing any lawns, but a lot of weeding. So we're going to need things like this, you know, the expandable little garbage can things. We're going to need tarps to put branches in so we can carry them. They have green waste containers there, but we need, you know, from the mobile home that we're working at, we need to be able to carry those branches and weeds and all that to the green waste container. So I need you to bring tarps and things like this, and I need rakes, and if you want to wear gloves, and lopping shears, and, you know, maybe shovels. There'll probably be, we'll need shovels and rakes, that kind of thing. So please bring tools, okay? Now, I have a list of who signed up. Oh, I got a list. That's great. Thank you. I have a list of everybody who signed up. If you need the address of Sunrise Community Church, I have that. I printed out a whole bunch of little things. I can give them to you right after church. If you need the address for the Heritage Oak Glen Mobile Home Park, I have that to hand to you so you'll know where it is. Okay? So are there any questions? Some of the people, yes, Carol. Yeah? Okay, that'd be great. If you want to bring that, yeah, that'd be wonderful. Sure, yeah, we could. Now, and another point, there may not be electricity that we can plug into. So if you bring like head shears or electric saw or something, we may, if you have a battery-powered, you know, tools like that, that would be better because There's really no electricity to plug into around there. So, okay. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, the main entrance of the church, and it'll be marked to where you go. So, and the people that are doing the physical labor stuff, you don't have to be there till 7, but if you want to support the people who are doing registration from our church, show up at 6:30. But the breakfast is at 7, so we'll eat. If you think, oh, I just want to show up at the mobile home park, well, you can do that too if you want, but then you probably won't get a shirt and that kind of thing, because we're going to be handing out shirts and stuff. It'll be kind of fun. It'll be a fun atmosphere there. But there is, for the physical labor part, there's going to be a lot to do. It'll be a full couple days worth of, we have to spend the night. So bring your sleeping bag. No, I'm totally kidding. Totally kidding. So we're not doing that, but it'll be 3-4 hours worth of work, okay? And people, thank you so much. People can still sign up. In fact, I have to talk like Joel. I have to talk to you about that. Okay, so you can still sign up to do it. Just see me right after church, because I am going out of the country today and I won't be around. So just top secret mission. Okay, thank you.
Wow. Well, that was a bomb that he just dropped right there. Yeah, okay, so you still can sign up to be a part of that. What a beautiful way to love our neighbors, very tangible way to love our neighbors. And I don't know, I think that's perfect for Michael. He's like the weed guy. When he comes to my house, he can't walk to my front door without pulling a weed. So I feel like, the Lord just gave Michael exactly what he was going to love. So, talk to Michael afterwards, a great way to see our neighborhood. The next is a way to be known. So on May 13th, Women of Redeemer is hosting a tea. This is going to be a potluck tea in Swenson Hall, 11 a.m. on May 13th. This is going to be a great opportunity for you to maybe get to know people in a more intimate setting than just on a Sunday morning. We will be hearing from our own Jan Howard from her small group on how to love our neighbors, and we will have discussion questions. And so there is an online sign up. You can find it on our website to sign up to come and participate in that, or you can sign up to be a host, or both, obviously. So I would encourage you, females of all ages. So yes, even our Redeemer kids, girls, are invited to this event from all the way down from 1 to 80. Everyone invited to our women's tea on May 13th. Finally, or over 80. Sorry, that's true. Sorry. Or we're not cutting it off at 80, and I will not name names, but we won't cut it off at 80. That's true. Okay, sorry. I'm taking way too long. No, Michael took too long. Okay. Kids Night Out. Kids Night Out. This is how to be loved. Kids Night Out is one of my favorite events we do here at Redeemer. It is also that same weekend, May 12th. This, I call it a win-win-win. Parents get a free date night because they're going to bring their kids here to church. So parents get to enjoy time alone together. Kids are shown love by being here and having a really good time. They're loved by their church. Our teens come and provide all that fun, and they earn money to go to their summer camps, Rock and Water, senior trip, things like that. It's a win-win-win. Parents get a night out, kids get loved on by the church, teens earn money for summer camps. So parents or grandparents, mark your calendars, the 12th from 4 to 7. Kids are welcome to come and have a fun night for Kids Night Out, a way that we can love many people in our midst. So be seen, be known, and be loved. All right, that is it for me about announcements. I am going to read our call to worship this morning. So this morning's call to worship is based on Matthew 28:17. It says, "When the disciples saw Jesus, they worshiped him, but some doubted." At the end of Matthew's gospel, the 11 disciples meet the risen Jesus in Galilee. These students of Jesus had spent almost 3 years with their teacher, intimately experiencing his kingdom ministry. They had heard him teach. They had witnessed his miracles. They had observed his love for the oppressed and socially vulnerable. They viewed his challenge to the religious leaders. They grieved his execution, and they rejoiced at his resurrection. So as they encountered Jesus on the mountain in Galilee, their first reaction is to worship him. For they recognized Jesus as more than a teacher, more than a miracle worker, more than a prophet. They had experienced him as Emmanuel, God himself living with and loving his people. While Matthew tells us that all 11 disciples worshiped Jesus, he also informs us that, quote, some doubted. Now, we might assume that these doubters were often a different group than the ones who were worshiping. After all, worship and doubt don't mix, right? We either worship or we doubt, don't we? However, the language that Matthew uses indicates that all 11 worshiped, while some of those 11 also doubted. In other words, they worshiped and doubted all at the same time. This morning, as we gather for worship, we can find great encouragement in these verses because it reflects real life. It reflects our lives. It reflects my life. Following Jesus is not an either-or experience. Rather, it's a both-and experience. Being a student of Jesus means bringing all that I am to him. My worship and my doubts. My hopes and my fears. My joy and my grief. My certainty and my questions. My trust and my worries. Jesus is so worthy of our worship, but he's also worthy of our doubts. So let's embrace this both and reality. And Redeemer Church, would you stand and let's worship God together this morning?
Amen. Thanks, Natalie. I'm just going to share too, as we were rehearsing some of these songs this morning, I didn't necessarily plan this, but I noticed this kind of theme that goes right along with that call to worship where Natalie read, Jesus' disciples realized he was more than just a teacher, more than just a prophet, more and more. And I realized the same thing as we were going through these songs today. A lot of the theme is that God is even more than what we think. And so you'll kind of hear that as we go through, but, he's even stronger. His love never fails. If you already think he's big, guess what? He's even bigger. And so think through kind of some of those themes as we go through and worship this morning. And let's see, kids, I think you're joining us for this first one. So your job is to sing nice and loud and kind of wake up the rest of these folks, okay? So here we go. Let's sing Your Love Never Fails.
I don't have to be thought I'd reach the other side, but your love never fails. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good.
Amen. Good way to start us off. All right, kids, thank you for joining us. You are dismissed at this point to Redeemer Kids. Let's give them a hand. All right, we're going to continue worshiping with our God.
Water you turned into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. None like you. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against?
At this point if you like, or you can remain standing, whatever you're more comfortable with. We're going to do one more song here, Your Love is Strong.
Heavenly Father, you always amaze me. Let your kingdom come in my world and in my life. You give me the food I need to live through the day, and forgive me as I forgive the people that wrong me. Lead me far from temptation, deliver me from the evil one. I look out the window, the birds are composing. Not a note is out of tune or out of place. I walk to the meadow, stare at the flowers, better dressed than any girl on her wedding day. So why should I worry? Why do I freak out? God knows what I need. You know what I need. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. The kingdom of the heavens is now advancing. Invade my heart, invade this broken town. The kingdom of the heavens is buried treasure. Would you sell yourself to buy the one you found? yes, you love me. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Our God in heaven, hallowed be thy name above all names. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us weary sinners. Keep us far from our vices and deliver us from these prisons. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong. Your love is, your love is, your love is strong.
Amen. Lord, we thank you that your love is strong, stronger than we can imagine. Thank you for being present with us in this place today. In Jesus' name. At this time, I'm going to invite Ryan Wilkerson up for a scripture reading.
Morning. It's reading from John 20, 24 through 29. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, the one called Didymus, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "I will never believe unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side, but don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me."
Well, good morning. Ryan, thank you for reading. Clay and David, thanks for leading us in worshiping through song this morning. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to preach, so I'm grateful for this chance this morning. We're going to jump right into it here. For the past few months as a church, we've been working through some of the key themes in John's gospel. Right? We've been talking about the I am statements of Jesus, and Pastor Dan and Pastor Natalie have preached on this theme, I am statements in which Jesus identifies who he is. These statements, along with many other creative themes in John's gospel, are designed to help the reader understand Jesus' identity. These themes are designed to help the reader trust Jesus' claims and teachings. And these themes are designed to help us as readers experience life with God. Specifically, John wants us as readers to see that Jesus is the divine Son of God. John wants us to understand that Jesus is the divine Son of God who became human in order to reveal God's nature to the whole world. More specifically, we could say that for John, Jesus makes Yahweh known. The God who is compassionate and gracious. The God who is very patient and overflowing in steadfast love and faithfulness. Or we could say Jesus makes the identity of Yahweh known. The God who sees the affliction of his people. The God who hears their cries. The God who knows their sufferings. The God who comes down to be with them. But John is not merely interested in understanding or increasing the head knowledge of his readers just for the sake of understanding. Rather, for John, it is important to understand Jesus' identity, but understanding is actually a means to an end. John's goal is for his readers to believe, to trust. In fact, John uses the verb that we typically translate to believe or to trust. He uses that Greek verb 90 times in his gospel. It's a lot. And the primary meaning this word seems to have, I think I have it on the screen here, is a settled confidence in Jesus' claims that leads to a life of faithfully following his teachings. So John wants us to understand so that we can believe, which would look something like this. But, as surprising as it might sound, even belief is not an end in and of itself for John. Believing is actually a means to an end. John wants his readers to understand that Jesus is the full revelation of God, yes. John wants his readers to respond to Jesus with confident trust in his claims and teachings. But John also wants his readers to experience life with Jesus. John tells his story about Jesus because he wants us, readers, to experience life with Jesus. Understanding leads to believing, which leads to experiencing. That's the pattern we see in John's story. John himself actually tells us that this is the goal in the very verses right after the ones Ryan just read for us, where John summarizes everything he has done and says this: these things are written. I've written this story about Jesus so that you, my readers, may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And that by believing, through believing, you may have life, or you may experience life in his name. So for those of us today who identify as followers of Jesus, we depend upon what John has written to understand Jesus' identity, to trust Jesus' claims, and to experience life with Jesus. But what is both beautiful and difficult about following Jesus today is that this cycle from understanding to believing to experiencing is rarely as smooth and as straightforward as I'm making it sound. For example, we all have experiences that challenge our understanding. We all have experiences that may lessen our trust. When we experience significant loss, whether of work, of health, of loved ones, of memories, of friendships, of finances, we rightly have some questions for Jesus. Why did you let this happen? If you truly love me like you claim, why did you allow me to experience this? then we may start to wonder if we can even trust Jesus' love, right? Or maybe we may start to just wrestle with, is Jesus' teachings really worth following? Is it really worth aligning my life with Jesus' teachings if he's going to allow me to experience this? Or on the opposite end, we may have an understanding of Jesus that does lead us to trust him and want to follow his teachings. But then we come into contact with a friend or family member, or we might read an article or a book or watch a YouTube or TikTok video that challenges that very understanding of Jesus. We now have questions. We now have doubts. We now have confusion. Something that we once thought was so clear, so obvious, is now uncertain. And these questions, these doubts, these confusions have the potential to lessen our trust. They have the potential to create a barrier in our experience of life with Jesus. So, while John wants his readers to move from understanding to trust to experience, John is not so naive as to assume that this process is easy and straightforward. In fact, at the very climax of John's story, the climactic moment in the story, John chooses to focus on one particular character, a character whom his readers could relate to, a character who struggled, who doubted, who questioned whether Jesus is worth it or not. And yet, this very relatable character has also been misunderstood by Christians throughout the centuries. And it's my opinion that this misunderstanding has created a huge burden for those of us who do struggle, who do doubt, who do have questions, who do have experiences that seem to contradict what we know about the nature of the God we trust. So my hope this morning is that by looking at the story of Thomas, which Ryan just read for us, we might better understand Jesus' nature. We might more deeply trust Jesus' claims. We might more fully experience life in relationship with him. But I also think that we will discover this morning that it is often through the doubt, through the questions, through the confusions, through the contradictory experiences that we can actually grow in our trust and more fully experience life with Jesus. All right, let's jump into it here. Let's talk about Thomas for just a brief moment, get a little background here. Thomas was one of the 12. This is a group of male disciples who were with Jesus pretty much 24/7, along with a group of female disciples who are collectively known as the women. But Thomas gets very little attention in the Gospels. He's basically just named one time in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and that's just in the list of the names of the 12 are listed. That's all he gets. John gives him a little more attention in his story. But the interesting thing to me is that we actually don't even know Thomas's name. We actually only know him by his nickname. Thomas was actually an Aramaic word, and Jesus and his disciples, those living in Judea, spoke the Aramaic language. In Aramaic, Thomas means twin. So Thomas is known as the twin. When we get to John's gospel, John gives us a little more description of Thomas, because as Ryan just read, we get the description, Thomas, the one called Didymus. Did you catch that? The one called Didymus. Well, that description doesn't give us much more help either, because that's the Greek word for twin. Okay? And so we don't know much about Thomas other than the fact that he was a twin, and we know nothing about his twin brother or twin sister. And so for our English translations, we could even just translate it something like the twin called the twin, because John likes to interpret some of the Aramaic words for his Greek readers. So that's why it sounds a little weird to our ears, but it fit John's purposes when he wrote the gospel. We do know a little bit more about the twin from writings outside the New Testament. When we get to some of the early church writings, we see that Thomas spent the rest of his life preaching about Jesus in Syria, in Persia, and even as far east as India. But regardless of his success as an evangelist, a preacher, or church planter, his identity for most Christians is shaped by John 20:24 through 29. So let's look a little more closely at this story. Thomas' story, the Thomas story that Ryan read for us, is the third resurrection story in John's gospel. All three of these stories come from chapter 20. The first story focuses on Mary Magdalene, the first witness, the first preacher of the resurrection. The second story happens a week later. The followers of Jesus are gathered in a room. They're scared of the Jewish leaders, and so the doors are locked. But the resurrected Jesus enters the room, shows them his hands and his side. The passage tells us that the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. In that story, the one Dan preached on last week, John emphasizes the importance of seeing the resurrected Jesus. Then when we get to our passage this morning, verses 24 to 29, the focus shifts back to one particular disciple. In this case, it's Thomas. And in verse 24, we're told that Thomas was not with the disciples when they saw Jesus. While most of Jesus' followers got to hear Jesus, got to see Jesus, got to observe his scars, Thomas had missed out. And yet the disciples share with Thomas the good news. Thomas, we've seen the Lord. We've got good news, Thomas, we've seen him. But it's Thomas's response to this good news that has marked him forever as doubting Thomas. Maybe you've heard that description. And while I do think that there is something in Thomas's response that does need to be corrected, that is called out a little bit as John tells this story, I'm also convinced that Christians have terribly misunderstood what it is that needs to be corrected. You see, when we call him doubting Thomas, we imply that it is wrong or sinful to have doubts, to have questions. We give the impression that there is something wrong with our faith or our trust. If we are ever confused, if we are ever uncertain. And for too long, I think this verse has been misinterpreted, at least as I've heard it and understood it, to mean that Jesus is upset with us when we question, when we doubt, when we struggle to trust his claims. But I'm going to suggest that's not what's happening in this story. So first, let's unpack what's actually going on with Thomas. What I'd like to suggest this morning is that the issue or the problem for Thomas was not that he doubted, it's not that he questioned, it's not that he even desired to see Jesus with his own eyes. I don't think that's the problem being addressed here. Rather, the problem is that he had gotten to a point where his heart had become hardened toward Jesus. And he felt entitled to make uncompromising demands upon Jesus. Now, there are two main reasons I'm going to give this morning to support that interpretation. And sorry to do this. You'll have to bear with me just a little bit. I'm going to morph into professor mode, which, if you don't know, is my day job. I'm going to have to get a little technical here just for a couple minutes because, in my view, the English translations we have, as good as they are, don't actually help us to see all that's happening in the Greek language that John wrote in. So we're going to unpack a couple things focused on the Greek. So just bear with me just a second. So let's first look at Thomas's reply to the good news in verse 25. Most translations say something like this: unless I see the nail marks, unless I put my finger where the nails were, I put my hands into his side, I will not believe. It's kind of a simple statement. I will not do this. But if you actually look at the Greek, a little bit more is going on here, because for John, this is the strongest way to express a no in the Greek language. The clause translated, I will not believe, is put in the strongest possible language to say no. So it's like Thomas is saying, I will never, 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 never believe. That's a little bit more accurate, which is why, if you go to the next slide, this passage or the translation Ryan used said, I will never believe unless I see, unless I touch. The issue here isn't that Thomas had questions. It's not even an issue that he doubted or even that he wanted the same experience his fellow disciples had. The issue seems to be that his heart had grown hardened, so that he flat out refused to believe unless his demands were met. Thomas had gotten to the point where he had begun to lay down uncompromising conditions that God had to meet. But there is a huge difference between saying, I have questions, I have doubts, I'm confused, I'm struggling, and then putting demands on Jesus that he would have to meet before we even consider giving him our trust. It's a very different type of situation. I'll come back to that thought in just a moment. There's one other verse, though, that helps us to see what's going on with Thomas in this passage, and that's Jesus' response to Thomas in verse 27. Again, there can be some misunderstanding here, partly due to the fact, again, I'm going to get nerdy Greek grammar stuff here, due to the fact that the English translations we have talk about actions. They're focusing on certain actions in Jesus' response to Thomas. Jesus says in the NIV, stop doubting, action. Believe. Do not disbelieve, action, but believe. Most translations imply that Jesus is making a very stark contrast between two actions. You got on one side the actions of doubting or disbelieving. Then you got the action on the other side of trusting or believing. Again, this gives us the impression that if we doubt, if we question, if we're confused, if we struggle, then we're on this side, and that's the complete opposite of believing or trusting, which is on this side. But again, the language is a little more nuanced than this. In the Greek language, Jesus does give John a command. There is a command here. But the verb used is what we would call a state of being verb. I know I'm sounding very nerdy just hearing it out of my mouth. I'm talking about state of being verbs, but if you're an English teacher, you might like this. A state of being verb. We could translate it something like, do not be, or stop being. Jesus is not calling out an action here. He's actually addressing Thomas's heart condition. This command is then completed with two adjectives. Okay? There's one negative adjective, faithless. Do not be faithless, or stop being faithless, Thomas. And then the positive adjective, faithful or full of faith. Be faithful. be full of faith. So we can translate it something like this. Stop being, state of being, condition of faithless, but enter into a new state, a new condition of being faithful. I think it's important to see these as adjectives, and let me explain why by giving some analogies with the English language here. There is a difference between the act of criticizing, which can be good and right and appropriate in certain contexts, and the state or condition of being a critical person. Can we agree on that? There's a difference between criticizing action and the state of being critical. There's a difference between the act of anger, which could be appropriate and necessary at times, and the state of being an angry, hostile, volatile person. One is an action, the other is a state of being, a condition. In the same way, there is a difference between the act of doubting, the act of questioning, the act of struggling, and the state of being faithless. And Jesus' words to Thomas are not about the action, they're about the state of being, the condition of Thomas's heart. So why does this matter? Jesus is not critiquing Thomas's questions or doubts or even Thomas's struggles. Rather, Jesus, and here's the key, Jesus is inviting Thomas to move from one state, one condition, to another. Thomas had become an unbelieving person. He'd become faithless. He'd become hardened to Jesus. And now Jesus is graciously inviting Thomas to return to his original state before Jesus' crucifixion, to return to the state of trusting faithfulness. So if you didn't understand anything I just said, let me give you the main point here. Thomas's problem is not that he had doubts or questions. His problem is not that he was uncertain or skeptical. His problem that Jesus addresses was that his heart had become hardened to Jesus, to the point that he began making uncompromising demands of God that seemed to be rooted in a condition, a state of faithlessness. So don't let this story, when it's read or when you're reading it on your own, don't let this story cause you to fear or question whether you are a true follower of Jesus. In those times you do have questions, in those moments when you do have doubts, in those seasons of struggle, in those times of confusion and uncertainty. The problem isn't Thomas had questions. The problem is he'd allowed his heart to become hardened toward God. But secondly, if we just step back and look at this Thomas story, there's another point I think it's worth making. We can all relate to Thomas's demand. We can all relate to what Thomas says in response to the disciples' good news. We have seen the resurrected Jesus. Thomas's uncompromising demand, even though there was a problem here, it was rooted in a condition of hardened faithlessness. The demand is still in some ways understandable. How many of us would prefer to see Jesus with our own eyes? How many of us would prefer to hear Jesus say, "Peace to you," with our own ears? How many of us would prefer to touch the crucifixion scars with our own hands? Wouldn't that be incredible? Wouldn't that secure our confidence in Jesus' identity and increase our trust in his claims and teachings? I'm sure it would. I can't tell you the number of times I've laid in bed at night just calling out to God, "God, I just want to see. Like, I don't know, have you ever had that experience? God, I just want to see. Or crying out, God, I want to hear something. I want to experience something. I just want a sign. Like, I think that's pretty understandable. Thomas's request is understandable. So many times we might feel that way as we are trying to follow Jesus about 2,000 years removed from his ministry on earth. So John puts Thomas in this story because on one level, his readers can fully relate to Thomas. The desire, the longing, the hope for a deeply personal experience of Jesus is understandable. It's a good thing. If it were inherently wrong or sinful for Thomas to want to see and touch and hear, then Jesus would not have offered that very experience to the other disciples just a week earlier. So Thomas expresses a longing, a desire that all followers of Jesus since the first century have had. And I would suggest that it is not wrong, it is not sinful for us to actually tell Jesus what we think we need, what we want. But keep it in mind that Thomas is also serving here as a warning that we need to be careful to keep our hearts from growing hardened toward Jesus if he chooses not to meet our demands and satisfy our every desire. Hope that makes sense. Let's move to the third point there, or here. What I love about this story, and I've not seen this before, even though I've taught New Testament classes for a very long time, something about studying this week really stood out to me. Thomas's story actually reveals some beautiful truths about Jesus. What's amazing to me is that despite Thomas's apparent hardened heart toward Jesus, despite his state of faithlessness, despite his uncompromising demand, Jesus still showed up. Jesus showed up. Jesus actually meets the demand. An incredibly generous act from the one who is compassionate, gracious, very patient, and overflows with steadfast love and faithfulness. Jesus says to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side." Jesus showed up for Thomas. The reality is that for some of us, our doubts, our questions, our confusions, our hurt or conflicting experiences will lead to a state of hardened faithlessness toward Jesus. When Jesus doesn't meet the expectation, doesn't satisfy the desire, or doesn't keep us from that traumatic experience, we might find ourselves in a Thomas-like season. And while the author John is writing his gospel in order to increase our understanding, in order to inspire our trust, in order to motivate us toward experiencing life with Jesus, he is also aware that Thomas's experience would in no way be unique. So if this is your situation this morning, whether you're in this room, whether you're watching online, I think you need to hear that Jesus is not disappointed in you. You need to hear that Jesus is not angry with you. Trust. Jesus is not waiting for you to get your spiritual life all figured out before he would accept you. Jesus looks at you with the same compassion he showed Thomas. And this morning, Jesus is inviting you to bring the demand, to bring the unmet desire to bring the pain, to bring the traumatic experience to Him. Bring it to Him. And as you do so, He is gently inviting you, patiently inviting you to turn from a state of faithlessness and return to a state of trusting faithfulness. And the act of being honest with Jesus is probably the first step in that return journey. And it can be as simple of a prayer as, Jesus, I desperately need you to blank. Last point. Thomas's demands were met. And he moved from his state of faithlessness to a state of trusting faithfulness when he saw and touched the marks of Jesus' crucifixion. At the climax of John's gospel, Thomas recognizes the divine identity of Jesus, and Thomas declares, "My Lord and my God." The entire gospel story, if we step back and look at the way John structured this story, the entire story has been moving toward this climactic moment. And it comes from the character who had been faithless, who had been hard-hearted, who had put uncompromising demands upon Jesus and even questioned the accuracy of the disciples' witness. And there's a lot we can unpack from that, but our takeaway at the moment is this. It was the scars of the suffering, it was the scars of suffering and crucifixion that revealed to Thomas the true identity of Jesus. Did you catch that in the verse? It was the scars of suffering and crucifixion that revealed to Thomas the true identity of Jesus as the full, complete, perfect revelation of God. In other words, the message for us today is, if you want to know what God is like, look at, reflect upon the crucifixion scars on the hands, the feet, and the side of Jesus. Which is why we approach this table. While we don't see, hear, and touch the resurrected Jesus like Thomas did, we still can contemplate and reflect upon his crucifixion scars. We're invited to see, touch, smell, and taste the bread, which is his body. We're invited to see, touch, and smell, and drink the juice, which is his blood. And Jesus tells us to do this in order to remember and to reflect upon his broken and crucified body. So the weekly taking of communion that we do here is intended to center our attention on Jesus' crucified body, so that as we hold the bread and the juice, we with Thomas can declare, "My Lord and my God." And this table is open to all who long to draw near to Jesus. Whether that is drawing near with joy, gratitude, and delight, whether that is drawing near with doubts, questions, anger, disappointment, or whether that is drawing near when you are at the point of desperation. You don't know what else to do than to bring a demand or bring a desire to Jesus. Jesus, I need you to blank. As you come to the table this morning, there will be the bread and the juice as usual. I'm going to invite you to take one of each, return to your seat, and you can just take it, drink, and eat as you feel led to do so. Clay will be leading us in songs. But when you came in, you hopefully received the blue card. That's the font is a little bit way too small, right? I apologize for that. But my thought this morning is this card can be used as a way of response. Depending on where you're at in your relationship with Jesus this morning, you might have some questions. There might just be some genuine things you have about Jesus and the Christian faith. You might just want to write that down. I have questions about, you're bringing it to Jesus. Or maybe you're doubting or confused about something. Maybe you're uncertain. Maybe there's hurt and sadness. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you're desperate for Jesus to do something, whatever it might be. I would invite you to write on that card. Maybe you received a pen. If not, there are some pens on the table when you come forward. Whatever it is that might be challenging your understanding this morning, whatever might be lessening your trust or hindering you from relating to Jesus, write it down, drop it in the little baskets that are on both tables, front and back, and then receive the elements. The act of bringing your doubts, bringing your questions, your pain, and even your desperate demands to Jesus this morning is not an act of hard-hearted faithlessness, but it's an act rooted in a state of trusting faithfulness. In fact, doing this, bringing these things to Jesus, is the path through which we move to or remain with Jesus, our crucified Lord and God. So would you come to the table, and would you come as you are? The table is open.
us to stand before the Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all.
As a reminder, I'll check in with Michael Dunn about Big Day of Service next week. There's fellowship here on the side. I'm going to invite you to stand for our benediction. If you are able or want to. As with Thomas, the crucified one sees your pain and affliction. So bring the pain, the sorrow, the fear, and regret to his compassionate attention. The crucified one hears your cries. So bring the doubts, the questions, the confusions, the uncertainties, the unmet desires to his attentive ear. The crucified one knows your suffering. There's no need to hide. There's no need to pretend. And the crucified one is with you this week in your doubts, in your questions, confusions, demands, unmet desires, and uncertainties. So as you go, may you allow yourself this week to rest in his presence. Peace be with you.